Okay, so let's go over some of these scenarios over here. And again, you can read below the video where there are some text that you can read and really observe. And again, write down your response and think about what you would do in each of the scenario. If it asks you to draft an email, go ahead and draft it, to the best of your ability. And then when you watch my video, again, it will make a lot more sense and you will be able to internalize. So the first scenario, I'll read it. You're working for a client, you built a great relationship with this client and have worked with this client for 3 years now. There's a high degree of trust. It's now time to bill your client for the work you performed. You didn't really track all the hours you put into the project, but you know you have roughly put in 40 to 45 hours of work. Now you did some really neat work and found a way to really do things efficiently last week that allowed you to solve a problem in a few hours of time that would have normally taken you 20 hours to do. Awesome. Therefore, you know you could build a client for 55 hours of work and the client would happily pay that amount. What would you do in this situation? That extra 10 hours a day could really mean a lot for your family. Especially, let's say you just had a baby 2 months ago and could really use that extra cash. How many hours would you bill for and why? So I intentionally tried to make it tricky. Life is not so black and white sometimes, right? Sometimes it's gray. It's a little bit gray situation. Let's say you really, really, really could use that extra cash. And there was just not a way for you to put in more hours. That just wasn't an option. What do you do? What I think is the wrong thing to do is to bill for 55 hours of work. That's just flat out wrong. You didn't, right? That, the client trusts you. And if you do that 55 hours of work, you may get by in the first month, maybe first few months, maybe first few years. But later, if the client found out you overbilled, your relationship is gone, just like that. That 3 years or 5 years of relationship you built with the client, just like that is gone. You're out. And you lost your whole reputation about your career just like that. Okay? Because one bad review like that, your reputation would be ruined. Do you really want to sacrifice your career for something like that? Maybe you do. Maybe you want to take the risk, but don't. Don't. It's not worth it. It's really, really not worth it. So then do you bill for 42 and a half? Do you bill for 45? If it was me, I would just bill for 40 or maybe even less, a little bit less than 40. Because maybe looking back, I could have done things a little bit better. So there's a high degree of trust and I want to honor that trust. So I'll just say, let me just bill for 38 hours. And then as a note, I would say, hey, Bill, I actually did work a little bit more, but I'm only charging you for 38 hours because of X, Y, and Z. Merry Christmas or, something positive. And client will really, really appreciate, right? Because it shows that you're going extra miles. You didn't charge for some of the work, although you did do the work, right? And you're going to earn that trust. And later, if you really, really need to put in, 70 hours of work or 80 hours of work, and you build a client that, they will happily pay because they know that you're a man of words. Okay? So honesty is really important on that scenario. Let's look at scenario 2. Social media at work. Sometimes you use social media, especially during your break time. Sometimes you spend time on Facebook, sometimes on Twitter, sometimes you read news. This really helps you recharge and give your brain a much needed rest. Your brain's tired, right? So having break, isn't it healthy? In the past, you spent a lot of hours without these necessary breaks, and you found that having these short breaks in between are increasing your productivity. So it's helping everyone. Now that you took a course on honesty, you're not sure whether you should keep taking these breaks or whether you should clock in out each time you're taking these breaks. What should you do? Would you email your supervisor and ask what you should do? Is that asking for too much? Right? You want to be conscious of the supervisor's time. You don't want your supervisor to babysit you. This is kind of a question that's asking to be babysat, unless you ask it a certain way, right? Would your supervisor think you're just not competent to make a decision like this? What if the supervisor asks you to deduct all the hours you spent in the past for taking in these breaks? Oh my goodness, I got the paycheck, but now I have to return some of these paycheck? What's the right thing to do? This is one of those gray lines. Now, so go ahead and write down what you would do. This is a tricky one. Pause the video if needed. So I'll share with you my perspectives. Now, you will have to go with your own answer that you feel is right. But if it was me, this is what I would do. Well, let me put myself as a supervisor hat. If you guys, let's say, I have 10 people and all 10 of them came after taking this course on honesty and say, Michael, yeah, last week I've spent 47 minutes on doing Facebook because I've taken, 8-minute break every hour to really recharge. I'd be like, man, why are you guys bothering me? Right? I know having some breaks in between is healthy. I want you to take some walks, to recharge so that you can stay productive. So that's fine. Don't even bother me with that. Right? Would be my response. If you took, appropriate amount of breaks. Now, what's the appropriate amount of break that's acceptable for a company? That really depends. So that may be specified in the company policy, in the company handbook, or it may be something that's not written down, but is passed more as a verbal thing. Okay. For me, if you take a 5-minute break for every hour, I have no problem with that. I don't even need to know about it. That's fine. Do whatever you need to recharge. If you're taking a 30-minute break every hour, okay, you're doing something wrong. What's going on? You've taken a few hour break and you're actually getting paid? You're being dishonest. And I find that out once, I may forgive you. I find that out twice, and you're fired. So it's business. It's professional. I'm not your babysitter. This is not a nonprofit. This is not a nursery. I expect every single employee to be professional. That just wasn't professional. So you're going to be fired after 2 warnings. Maybe another company, they'll give you 3 warnings and you'll get fired. Okay? You don't want to, again, risk your career on things like that, on a clumsy mistake like that. You don't, right? Now, what you could do if you're not so sure because you're new is you can email the supervisor, but not be like, hey, how many minutes of break am I allowed to take? You got to introduce that a little bit better. So if it was me, I would say, hey, Bob, I'm new. I've been every hour or so, I take a 5-minute break, 7-minute break to recharge by, reading some articles at Hack Y Combinator and, blah, blah, blah to get myself educated. It helps me to have helps me to recharge and to stay productive. Just wanted to see if that is okay, or if you wanted me to clock out during those short breaks. I'm happy to do either way. Just don't want to do something that goes against the company policy or your policy. Please advise? ? That is a wonderful, acceptable email because you're new. That's okay. Okay. You may decide that, I've taken some long breaks and wasn't supposed to do that. You may just say, let me just never do that going forward. And maybe that's okay. But just admit that you made a mistake. And you have to be honest and say, hey, by the way, supervisor, I want to confess, and this is all the things I did wrong. Come on, your supervisor is busy, right? Again, 300 emails at 4 p.m. on Friday that they have to do. Do they want to babysit you all of that? They're not a priest. Go in and confess to your priest and then come back and just work really hard if your supervisor is already happy with your work, and just never do that again. But there's no need for you to confess that to your supervisor, in my mind, because they're busy, right? And if you're performed up to your task, that's okay. And just going forward, just don't meet your task only. Now use that extra energy and focus to over deliver, to be more proactive, and to contribute more to your team. Okay, so you can take that at a positive angle. So anyway, that's what I would do. I wouldn't confess to my supervisor, right? But if my supervisor asked, hey, were you taking, these breaks that were this long? Would I lie? I would say, oh, you caught me. Yes, Just be honest. But you don't have to divulge information when it wasn't asked in that situation. Now, as you carry more responsibilities and leadership, how much you should disclose, you should be more cautious and more proactive on. So if I'm just an individual contributor, I don't want to go and confess to my supervisor. No. But if you're a supervisor, you got to think, what are the things that I forgot to communicate to my team members that I could communicate to them that they would feel more part of the group. So you have the responsibility. They're under your stewardship. So if you're thinking of several things that you can do to better communicate, disclose information, share new updates, share new news so that they feel like they're part of the team, really take the opportunity to communicate that. If you're an executive of a department, or you're leading a whole company, the responsibility and the stewardship to share more information, you try to lean more on sharing information rather than not disclosing information. So again, as you go up the hierarchy and as you have more responsibility, because more is expected to those who have received more, right? To those who are more given, right? More is expected, or something like that. So as you rise through the organization, as you have increased responsibilities, think about, what can I do to help my team members so that they know what's going on, they're involved, and any insights that come from that, share, okay, instead of trying to hide. But again, you may be part of the company that do not like to disclose. And if you're part of that company, be respectful. Respect the company value and don't go against it. If you want to go against it, just find a new company instead of trying to create a riot and a new revolution inside that company. That's not going to work. It doesn't work. If you don't like the manager, you can't kick out the manager. You can't report to the manager's manager. That's not going to work. The most, recommended route is find a new manager yourself, either by going to another department or joining a new company. But sometimes people stress too much about a difficult manager and they try to change the manager or change the department. There's only so much you can do, and you're going uphill battle. It's much better to initially join a team or a company or a department where their values align with your core values as much as possible. Okay? All right, let's look at another scenario. So it's scenario 3, and you can also look below the video. Okay, so colleagues using social media. This is an interesting one. Let me change my view so you can also see it. So colleagues using social media. You find that some of your colleagues use Facebook all the time. In fact, they're getting paid and they're reporting that they're working, when in fact they're on Facebook or YouTube for 3-4 hours a day. Oh my goodness, they're being dishonest. You don't want to bring it up directly to the colleagues, as you don't want to ruin their relationship, your relation with this person. And plus you're having meals with them, you have good relationship with them. You don't want to be whistleblowers. Should you report this to your supervisor, whom this employee also reports to? Should you talk directly to the colleague to have them fix their behavior? All right, so this is tricky. This is hard. What would you do in that situation? If the answer is it depends, tell me, what does it depend on? And on that depending factor, what would you do? If the depending factor is A or depending factor is B, what would you do? Outline that out. Take 5 minutes, up to 5 minutes, outlining your thought on this, and then pause the video. Unpause the video after you've written that response. So I think this is a tricky one. So my answer would also be, what you would do would depend on the situation. So one of the things I would ask is, how strong is my relationship with my supervisor or with my colleague? So if my relationship with this colleague is super strong, I may just have a talk with that colleague and just say, hey, I noticed that this is what you're doing. But again, even that one is really weird, right? It's really, really weird to have that talk with the colleague. So if you really, really like know that colleague very well, like you've been buddies for 20 years and just happen to work at the same company, you could you could talk to them because you've been friends since childhood, right? You talk about everything with this, person anyway. In that case, yeah, go in and have a talk. You can talk to that person with for whatever, right? Relationship is super strong, so it'll be fine. But you don't know this colleague that well. You want to have that uncomfortable talk with this colleague and say, hey, why are you working on Facebook? Or why are you using Facebook and YouTube so much? You didn't clock out? Okay, that is wrong too. Why is that wrong? You're not their supervisor. Why do you think it's your responsibility to fix their behavior when you're not managing them? So that's overstepping your boundary. You shouldn't do that. Okay? Is that going against the rule of honesty? Well, there are multiple facets here, so I don't think that's the right route. Do you just go and report to the supervisor? Or do you meet with the colleague and say, hey, I don't know you that well, but I noticed that you're doing this. Unless this behavior changes in the next 2 weeks, I'm going to report you to the supervisor or HR. What the heck? You would start getting bullied in the team because you're just not being considerate. And maybe you're doing the right thing, but you're not their boss. You're not the manager. You're not the one footing the bill, for the company. You're not the investor. So you're overstepping your boundary too. So you're doing good thing, but you're overstepping your boundary. And you got to be very careful in an organization, especially bigger the organization. So that's probably a bad thing. Do you go and just directly talk to the supervisor and say, hey, supervisor, I know you got 300 emails that you want to finish in the next hour, but I have something important I want to share with you. Oh, so and so is using Facebook for X hours. I did this. The supervisor is going to be like, well, I appreciate you telling me that, but deep inside, the supervisor is probably thinking, oh my goodness, all these additional things. You don't think the supervisor actually already knew about some of these behavior? Right? Most likely the supervisor already knows. So on this situation is tricky. I think what I would do if I was in that situation is I would make a commitment that I would not do that. Right? I'll be honest with my own hours. But I cannot, because I don't have stewardship over these people, I cannot directly tell them what to do. That's overstepping my boundary. And my supervisors probably already aware and are working on it. Now, if that becomes a big problem and you just feel like the supervisor just has no idea, what I would do is I would really strive to build a strong relationship with that supervisor and earn the supervisor's trust first. Once I have enough trust built with that supervisor, then I would approach the supervisor and say, hey, look, I've been debating whether I should share this or not. But because I was so new, I felt hesitant until I, have built better relationship with you and also got to know the team more. But I feel like there is something that you should know about, or you may already know about, that I wanna let you know about. And you want to be discreet. You don't want to tell employees' names, right? Because that's basically betrayal of your colleagues. So you say, I notice so and so have behavior of doing this, and it just has really bothered me for a while. I thought you should know. I didn't do anything about it because I didn't want to overstep my boundary, but I thought it would be important for you to know because I know you care about the team and I also care about the team. I think your supervisor would appreciate that. And then when they may ask who is it that is doing so and so. Well, say, hey, I don't wanna give out names of my colleagues. You just try to be generic, right? And your supervisors will appreciate how you're trying to be discreet. You could report that to the HR, have a conversation with the HR manager too, but you gotta be, just respectful. A lot of these people who are poor performers will get fired one way or another. But there are right processes for getting fired or leaving the job. And if you're not their supervisor, you are not part of the process. So you don't have to own that, right? So don't be a Superman and save the day, because in the long run, you could be doing more damage to the organization by overstepping on the boundary. For example, what if that employee who's spending 3 to 4 hours a day, let's say is kind of lazy, but still puts in 4 hours a day of very important work, and the company needs them to do that work. So the supervisor knows, yeah, they could be more effective, but at the next downsize, that person is going to be let go. So that decision was already made. But because they're already contributing to that 4 hours a day on something important, we're going to let them stay until the next downsize happens. Who knows? If that's the situation, you stepping in and causing all that stir could cause more damage to the company and the morale. And you don't need to go through that unnecessarily. You do need to be careful not to make a judgment on that person's character, right? And you don't say that person is lazy or that person doesn't care. You don't know all the things that are going behind the scene. Maybe that person is working evenings and weekends. Maybe that person has some medications they're taking or something personal where they just cannot focus. And as much as they want to, they're just not able to focus. And this is their way, but they're making it up through some other ways. They've talked to the supervisor already multiple times. The supervisor is well aware they're trying to work something out. You don't know all that situations, and you don't need to know all that situation. You don't need to be a cop and go after all that information. Give people a benefit of doubt. Do not judge someone else's character, right? Build relationship with the people. Give time, and when you feel like it's really needed, cautiously approach the people with the right process or with the right authority who can make some decisions, and let them know that, hey, I could be wrong, in my observations. Go there with a compassionate heart, with a kindness, instead of going with the mindset, hey, like I caught on something, right? Don't do that. Be nice to people all the way around, and it will come back to help you. Timing works differently for in the organization. Sometimes, you know, these folks who don't contribute, who shouldn't be part of the organization, they will naturally fall apart, or they're going to be, cut when the next layoff happens. We don't know what's going to happen. And a lot of times executives don't know either, right? So just be respectful. Find out within my realms of responsibilities, what are the things that I can do to make more impact, rather than thinking in realms of all these other responsibilities that I don't have direct stewardship over. What can I do, or what can I report on? That just doesn't make a good contributing member of the team.